What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I am bringing you an updated Dinomorphia deck profile. Post, Dimension Force, where the deck saw some massive support in the form of Rexstrum and its new Fusion Trap, and I think the deck got such a huge buff and is so much better now than it was before. And yeah, this is the updated profile from the last one I uploaded when the deck initially came out. And I was actually going to play this deck at the upcoming regional, but more on that later after the profile. So if you want to hear my thoughts on this deck and as far as the regional is concerned, stay tuned until after the profile. Before we get into this profile, I do want to let you guys know, Discord link down below where you can find all of our other social media links as well. And if you do enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh content, feel free to subscribe and like this video. It really helps me out in what I do here on the channel and really helps grow the channel. Trying to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, small little goal made by me. Again, if you haven't seen my most recent videos and maybe you're new to the channel, I'm in a brand new apartment, so we do have a little bit of an echo, but that will soon be fixed once we upgrade this room to a studio. Again, there's just a lot of, just having moved, there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be done. But without further ado, let's get into this Dinomorphia deck profile. All right, so starting off with the profile, we're gonna start off with the very, very standard 3 Theresia, beautiful Starlight Rare, and then 3 Diplos. So these are just the main monsters for the Dinomorphia deck. All of these monsters are very important, and you have to run them all at 3. It is mostly because your traps require them in your deck for them to be super, super good. And your traps will not function, especially Frenzy, if you do not have at least one of these in your deck. So even though Diplos isn't the greatest card to start off with, you still have to maximize him. And yeah, you just have to maximize all 6 Dinomorphia monsters. Last up for monsters is actually 2 Lord of the Heavenly Prison. So the thing about this card is this is sort of like cause for the format. You don't really need him for setting things as often. Now, he's really good to set things like Domain or your other Fusion Trap. It can be super, super good just to have access to your trap on the next turn. However, the real reason you need him is because Guardian Chimera is running around, and this deck has a very strange Despia matchup, and I will sort of talk more about that later. But also things like Sword Soul Blackout. There's a lot of reasons to actually protect your backer from spells and traps. It's not so much for cards like Lightning Storm, because this deck has a lot of in-engine outs for things like Lightning Storm, Feather Duster, anything like that. But Lord is really good as a way to protect you from specific things like Guardian Chimera and Blackout while also getting you more engine, and he can be a starter in a sense as well. So that wraps it up for monsters. On to the spell cards. We have the 3 Pot of Prosperity, and you can use this card very effectively in this deck because you don't need too much of your extra deck. You need some very specific cards, and being able to dig 6 deep is very, very powerful. And we also run 2 Pot of Duality, which not every list is on this card, but this card is so good in this deck because especially first turn, you are just never special summoning first turn, and this card is just free. It allows you, with Prosperity to dig 9 cards deep, which will really assist you in seeing one of your starter plays. And that is why we are on the 5 pot cards. Speaking of these cards, a build recently did really well at the regional I went to in top 4 with Sword Soul. He was playing Dinomorphia, and his list was quite a bit different. He chose to maximize a lot of floodgates, which I personally don't like and I don't think is the way to go. But he wasn't playing any of these pot cards, and that is very strange because they are ways to get to your starters, but as well they can also find just the best traps in your deck. And he was on 3 Fossil Dig instead of the pot cards. I definitely think these are the way to go because they're just so good at finding different things you need than just your starters, because a real weakness of this deck is seeing too many monsters. So these sort of stop you from having the problem where you see either no monster or too many monsters, because it helps you find the cards you actually need. That being said, we are on the 1 Fossil Dig, and 1 Fossil Dig might seem a little weird, but the real reason for 1 is, again, when you're running Prosperity and Duality, and you can dig 9 cards deep, or 6 or 3 depending on how it goes, but the ability to dig 9 cards deep, one-ofs like Fossil Dig suddenly become super, super easy for you to actually see, and it's gonna feel like you're running a lot more than 1 Fossil Dig. So the goal is to not see too many monsters, but having a 4th Theresia with all the pot cards, it increases your chance to see her like exponentially. So the one Fossil Dig, and also because we're running Lord can like set this card, which gives you access immediately to Theresia on the next turn. And the reason we don't play more Fossil Dig than just one is, again, we don't want to see too many monsters, because that is like one of the real weaknesses for this deck, is seeing way too many monsters. And then last spell is Called by the Grave. You kind of need to run this in this deck because this deck is severely weak to Ash Blossom, and always has been, and that's simply because of the way, I mean, you essentially just have a bunch of Shaddoll fusions, so Called by is super good in this deck, and is also just a great go second card this format into a deck like Despia. Now on to the traps, which is, you know, just the bread and butter of the Dinomorphia deck, and we're going to start off with the Dinomorphia traps. We're going to have the 3 Dinomorphia Frenzy, brand new out of Dimension Force, and this deck boosted the deck so much, and we're going to talk about it in tandem with our 3 domains. So we're maxing out each of the fusion traps, and that is because these are, you know, sort of your best starters. Of course, Theresia gives you access to these, and she's technically your best starter because she is these plus a body. But like, you want to see at least one of these. And drawing 2 together is super good for a couple of reasons. And honestly, the biggest boost to this deck is the fact that there's 2 fusion traps. Because it means if one gets Ash Blossomed, you can still activate the other one and go into full combo. And like able to get both your Kentragina and your Rexstrom onto the field. And that is huge for this deck, because before it was like 1 Ash Blossom and you're in trouble, but now 2 fusion traps let you play around Ash by setting both. And they're also super good just together as well. And again, you just really want to see one. So I wanted to maximize all 6 of them. And like honestly, the best thing about getting a new fusion trap, besides seeing it more consistently, is the fact that it lets you play around Ash Blossom. So we are maximizing 3 of each. And for the rest of your Dinomorphia traps, we have the 3 Sonic, and the 1 Brute, and the 1 Alert. So this might seem a little strange because Brute is definitely most of the time a 2 of in a lot of lists. And Sonic, I talked about in my last deck profile. I was going to take out the reversion for the 3rd Sonic, and we did do that because this card is insane and it stops like every card that beats this deck. So not only is this a card that beats Lightning Storm evenly matched in Engine, but it also stops things like Droplet, Dark Ruler, and very importantly, like stopping those to protect your Rex, because Rex will sort of win the game on his own as long as he's unaffected by things. So Sonic is really good for that. However, or I guess before talking about more about this, talking about these, I went to locals today, and you know, I went X1, and these ratios worked like super good. I never wanted more than 1 of each of these, and that's because you can just like set them off Theresia whenever you need them. But these, and technically Sonic, but more importantly these, like they really do nothing unless you see a Dinomorphia monster as well. So I didn't want to like have too many traps that required you seeing a Dinomorphia to play. But yeah, having 1 of each of these is super good because it means you technically have 2 because of Kentragina and easy access through Kentragina or through Theresia. I felt like this ratio was fine. But honestly, like Sonic is not good go second, so going forward, Sonic might go back to being a 2 of actually, despite being super good. Again, it's just not great go second, and this deck needs some good go second options, especially for what we are playing as I get through the deck, because going second, of course, is much more difficult for this deck than going first, as seen by all of the purple cards. Alright, next up, definitely, you know, the blowouts of the deck. We have the 3 Torrential Tribute. This card is insane in trap decks and helps it go second. This card's a little weird this format because Despia have opening, and opening can it hinders the efficacy of a card like Torrential because their stuff will just stay alive. But if they don't have opening and you can like hit Masquerade with this card, it's very important because Masquerade is a threat to this deck. But also it's so good sometimes to just be able to pop all of your stuff and get all their effects. Like your stuff getting destroyed can be pretty good. So 3 Torrential. But the best blowout in the deck is definitely the triple Ferret Flame. I think one of the reasons to play this deck is Ferret Flames. It is the best removal trap in the game, in my opinion. Like in the entire game, I think Ferret Flames might be just the best removal trap there is. And that's mostly because of sort of its wording, but also just how broken it is. So first of all, it's not once per turn. It doesn't target, it doesn't destroy, and the fact that it says make your opponent means it targets the player and not the card. So if Adignister puts up like a 6k attack, Arrival Cybers, you can still just send that thing back to the deck. Like it doesn't matter because you're not affecting the card. So unaffected Towers cards still lose to this. It clears entire boards by itself. it's honestly so insane, and in this deck, this is the only deck that can actually use it, and it is so broken. Like, this card wins games on its own. I think it's one of the reasons to play this deck. And of course, some hand is going to be weird because it's not instantly good going second. Because, you know, you might have no cards that like pay half your life points. But if you can like get down to 4,000 or better yet 2,000 by activating some Dinomorphia cards, Ferret Flame suddenly just beats the opponent's entire board. And yeah, it's honestly one of the reasons to play this deck. Like, it's so good. Next up, we have the 3 main deck Solemn Judgment, and these are the only Solemns main decked. I've opted not to play Strike, which is very different than my last build. But Strike, this format, is really strange. It was really strange in the deck, first of all, because it has weird issues with the life point count, but it's also just not very good versus Despia at all. They chain block everything, so Strike often ends up being just dead and not good. But the reason we don't play Strike as well is because your first turn, if everything resolves correctly, your first turn is going to be Frenzy, pay half, go down to 4K, make Kentragina, pay half, target Frenzy, and then, you know, do it again, and you're at 2K, and then you summon Rexstrom, and Rexstrom using his effect to like stop things is gonna put you at 1K, which means you can't activate Strike. So Strike initially was only to stop things like Ash Blossom anyways, but now that we have 2 fusion traps, I feel like you need Strike less. And it was just coming up and it was really weird. But Solemn Judgment is very good because you can always activate it. And it again protects your Rexstrom from like the most devastating cards like Droplet, Dark Ruler, or even something like a Raigeki. Anything that would affect your Rexstrom, Solemn Judgment is sort of here to protect. And also, it is just like one of the best cards in the game, and it won me like 2 or 3 games today. Like, it was actually insane, like by itself. And then another weird choice for this deck is I actually opted not to run Skill Drain, because with the new cards and also the fact that your like turn 1 play puts you on 1,000 life points, I felt like Skill Drain, in all of my testing, it actually wasn't that great. After testing today, I might add it back in, but what I decided to actually play was 2 main deck antispell, which is, you know, obviously terrible go second, but this card is so crazy against Despia, which is a very hard, almost unwinnable matchup, and it's very good versus, you know, like Sky Striker, Pendulum, any deck that's not really like Sword Soul, even though it can be pretty good versus them. This card also just stops all the things that beat Rex. Like, if you flip this and then you make Rex later that turn, you're not getting, you know, Forbidden Droplets, you're not getting Super Polymerization, which is huge, you aren't getting Chaliced, you aren't getting Dark Rulered. Like, Antispell just beats everything that beats Rex gets beat by this card. So I really wanted to main deck it and high roll sort of game 1, draw this card, and it's really good. And it was a great card, but I lost every die roll today, so that's another thing to consider. And then 3 Goes in Match. This card hurts you none, and I felt like this is just the better trap for the format. Sure, it's worse against Despia, which is a big deal, but against literally everything else, Goes in Match feels better. Against Floowandereeze it's better. Against Sword Soul it's better. And it can still be pretty good versus Despia if you hit them on a Lubellion. It can be absolutely devastating. So Goes in Match was my floodgate of choice, but we are siding Rivalry that can sort of swap with this. And yeah, that's it for main deck. That is 40 cards in the main deck. On to the extra deck. I'm gonna start off very simple. 3 Kentragina. You want to max out a lot of your Dinomorphia fusions because 1, you have the extra deck space, and 2, these are going to come up the most often. And then 3 Rexstrom. And this new card, just straight out of Dimension Force, is definitely the biggest buff this deck got, because this card, it wins games on its own. Like, it's so beyond powerful, it's hard to put into words how much this card did for this deck. It truly turned the deck upside down and made it to where like the fusion traps are actually a threat. It's not like get Kentragina and then if you have Brute, it's an interrupt and it's like okay, and it's not just like Skill Drain with 4K beat sticks. And another reason I took Skill Drain out is because like oftentimes I would draw it and Rex was already doing its job better than Skill Drain could. And by the time I was finished using Rex or they outed Rex, I didn't have the life points to pay for Skill Drain anyway, so it wasn't even like a good follow-up or like a, you know, my Rex got outed, so now I have Skill Drain. It just didn't really work out that way. So yeah, Rex, if you don't know what he does, he essentially, your opponent can't activate monsters who have higher attack than your life points, which, you know, if you're at 63 life points, happens to be everything in the game. So Rex essentially is like a Mystic Mine that can also make your opponent's monsters really small, which helps you deal with sort of battle phase shenanigans that can lose you the game due to being so low on life points. And Kentragina is just, one of the main fusion monsters of the deck. It helps you get both, and she's a huge beat stick. And all of them float. So, like, the fact that they float means even if your board gets cracked, you're usually in a pretty good spot and can just make your entire board. Again, lastly, 2 Stealth Bergia. You don't need 3 because if you run out of Frenzy targets and you still want to make this, you can just send, like, the 3rd Rexstrom. I have never made the 3rd Rexstrom in all my testing, and that's even after using one of them to make itself. So, like, 2 Stealth Bergia is completely fine, even with the Prosperity build. Then on for some rank 4s, we got Baguska because he's the best card of this format. And we have Tornado Dragon because we are running anti-spell main deck, so we do need an out for the back row they're setting, so we can actually, like, abuse the fact that we have anti-spell. Logia, Dolka, these cards are insane. And then lastly, we have Dark, Unicorn, and Access Code, which actually came up today. Like, this package almost never comes up. It's just here just in case. And the just in case actually came up because I played against Cyber Darks, and he put the 5k unaffected guy out, and, you just make 53, and you're just going to beat over it. But, like, Ferret Flames, if I drew it, was going to be an out, but we didn't draw Ferret Flames, which means Access Code had to come out. And it was pretty good. And yeah, so that is going to be it for the deck profile. I'll go ahead and put out the Theresias to look at while I sort of discuss what I meant earlier when I was talking about taking this deck to a regional. So, sort of talking about why I'm actually not going to be taking this deck to regionals, despite the fact that I think this deck got a huge buff, and I think the deck is super awesome. Like, it's a really good deck, I think. I think this is one of the craziest decks I've played in a while, if you get its engine and it's, actually moving. The reason I'm not going to play it, despite it having a really good Sword Soul matchup, because, traps are good, a really good Flunder matchup, because traps are good, it cannot beat Despia. It can't do it. Like, obviously there are going to be hands where their hand's weaker and you have a really strong hand. They're not able to get rolling and you just win. So, like, obviously this deck can beat Despia. But if they open good, you've lost if they're anywhere competent, because Masquerade exists. And this deck plays into Masquerade so badly because everything pays half. So if you activate a Fusion Trap, you pay 600, and then you pay half, so you go down to, I think you're going to go to 32, right? No, 36. And that already, then you pay another 600, and you go down to 14 when you pay half. And you see what I'm saying, right? You're going to, just like your regular combo is going to lose to Masquerade. And that is just one reason why I think you just can't play this deck right now very effectively, this format. As long as Masquerade is just super good, I think this deck has tough competition. And the fact that Super Poly is around and it just beats your board by itself, it's just absurd. So I was going to take this deck, and I think the deck itself is crazy, but I think it has a very hard time in the current meta. And that is why I've opted not to play it. But that is going to be it for this deck profile. If you want to comment on the deck, leave it down below. I'll read what you think. Maybe stuff you're doing with Dinomorphia right now, any techs you're running. This is, of course, pure, not the branded version. So, like, the branded version's a little different and maybe has different weaknesses, but Masquerade, to me, just seems like such a problem. But besides that, I think this deck is insane. This deck is super fun, and it's one of the most funs I've had playing a trap deck in a long time, since essentially Trap Tricks, maybe, because I just love Trap Tricks. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, subscribe. This is Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.